And welcome back to Open Your Eyes. We're moving now into our second segment for the morning. And this one is a conversation that we need to have, and everybody should be aware. It's Belize's roadmap to end child marriages and early unions. We've got folks in to talk to us about it. We've got Margaret Nicholas, who is the Executive Director at National Committee for Families and Children, NCFC. We also have Alison Drayton, who is the Director and Representative, UNFPA, Sub-Regional Office for the Caribbean, and also Alison Parker, who is the country's representative of UNICEF. Ladies, good morning and welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Pallas.
It's nice to have you guys in. This morning I was reading over over what was sent to us, the information that you guys have sent to us, and you know it breaks my heart. It's hard to decipher the situation that's going on, because for the most part I'd say, you know what, that's not going on in our country, at least not in 2020. Let's go there and talk about ending child marriages and early union. Miss Margaret, let's get to you. This thing's still going on in our country?
Yes, John, and hence the reason we're here. Because this work has started a long time ago. It's an extremely long journey, and we are now at this pathway, for which we are very pleased that we now have the roadmap. And the roadmap in itself is not the end of the whole process. In fact, it is another milestone, and it pushes us forward as we really and truly work towards trying to end this phenomenon, as we will call it, of child marriage and early unions. Because we were able to do many things over the years. Because, as you know, the National Committee for Families and Children in 2017 had commissioned a strategy to end violence against children.
Yes.
And in doing so, it also commissioned a Child Protection and Technical Working Group to oversight the strategy. And one of the strategic focus area of the strategy was to change norms and values to prevent child marriages and other scourges among our children. And that same year, the National Committee for Families and Children also launched the Children's Agenda, which has its national outcomes and its transformational goals, and which is vision that in 2030, Belize should be the best place in the world to raise children and their families. And so those are some humongous tasks. Now the roadmap, the way forward with the roadmap, it has, as I said, been a long journey, because through the cooperation, partnership, technical and financial assistance from UNICEF, UNFPA, CAMI funds, and the whole international agency joint relationship to end child marriage and early unions, we were able to do several things to come to where we are today. We were able to actually engage the non-governmental organization to help us to be able to understand exactly, and this is Go Haven, to understand exactly what is child marriage and early unions.
Yes.
What is its impact on our adolescents and our young persons? And we were also able to try and identify what are some of the drivers of child marriages and early unions.
Yes.
And more importantly, we were able to try and find out, in fact, who are actually conducting these early marriages of children under the age of 18 or even before their 15th birthday.
Wow.
And so we were able to get that. And as you know, the Inter-Agency Regional Joint Program to End Child Marriage and Early Marriages in Latin America and the Caribbean has actually defined it as formal marriages or informal unions between boys or girls under the age of 18. And that is directly in conformity with the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which does define, in fact, that a child is any person under the age of 18. I think what is also important to note is that these child marriage and early unions, they have serious consequences for adolescents, boys and girls, and our society as a whole. Because here we have children who their whole life has been disrupted and their entire social development has been put on hold.
Yeah.
And just to share a little bit about, give you some data. Um, According to the Belize Multiple Indicator Cluster Survey, which is conducted by UNICEF, and this was in 2015, it reveals that 3.9% of women, or 675 women ages 15 to 19, and 5.1% of men, or 884 men ages 15 to 19, first married or entered into a marital union before their 15th birthday. Some 20.8% of women, or 3,601 women, and 10.7% of men, or 1,855 men, 15 to 19, are currently married or in a union. So yes, John, it is happening.
Yeah.
And I think that it is worthy to note that an earlier survey, which was again conducted by UNICEF in 2011, reported that 15.2% of girls were married or in a union, and 5% of girls had married by the age of 15. And therefore, the proportion of girls aged 15 to 19 years currently in child marriage and early union has risen by 3%, from 15.2% to 20.8%. Now, this data shows that, in fact, Belize seems to be the second highest rate of child marriage and unions in the Caribbean.
Wow.
And unfortunately, child marriage is characterized as a human rights violation, and it is a form of gender-based violence. So it is a human rights violation, and it is also a form of gender-based violence. And that was just to kind of put things in context, no?
You know, reflecting on the last time we had this conversation and to where we are today, looking at how we're going to address it, it's so important to put it into perspective. But I want to tackle some of the misconceptions very early on, because I think one of the things that people automatically assume when they hear early union or child marriage is that they think it's solely in rural areas or based on cultural practices. Is that what we are seeing in Belize?
No, and hence the reason why we had those studies conducted, why we had those focus groups. And that actually revealed that this is a problem throughout the country of Belize. In fact, just recently a report was brought to my attention that this was happening in the Corozal district. So it is not only in the deep south, or because of what people might think is culturally right to do. It is a problem that we are faced throughout the country. And so it was very, very relevant and timely that we were able to put together the roadmap. The process was a very inclusive one, because there were several consultations across the country of Belize. There were also several consultations with sector groups like education and the faith-based organizations, and in particular, there were consultations with young people, because it was very, very important to hear what is it that young people are talking about with regards to this matter. What is it that they are contributing, and what are their recommendations as the way forward in ending child marriages and early unions?
So the second misconception I wanted to tackle is whether or not it is actually illegal, and also whether or not we're talking about children marrying children or children marrying adults.
Well, to begin with, if anybody who is married before the age, by the age of 15, that is definitely illegal, because under our Marriage Act, we are married at 18. And of course, the survey revealed that, in fact, our children are not only marrying to children, but they're also marrying to much older persons.
Yeah.
And it also revealed that some of these children are forced into
Yes.
these marriages. And some of the reasons given were poverty. Some of the other reasons given were that, households were crowded, and so people were looking for a better way out. And so there were several reasons why some of the drivers that actually had children ended up into these terrible situations.
Yeah. I would like to know, and of course, Alison, you guys could jump in whenever you're ready. How is the data gathered, though?
Well, the thing is, we had, again, with the technical and financial assistance from UNICEF, UNFPA, and the other partner agencies, we were able to hire a consultant in the person of Ms. Shirley Neal, who did an awesome job. And so she was able to gather data from across the country. She was also able to gather data from existing literature and so on and so forth that were available. As I said before, it was a very intensive work towards getting to where we are today.
Yeah. I want to talk about some of the actions. Let's get UNICEF Alison in at this time. And first of all, welcome. This would be your first conversation with us. We know you are the new representative for Belize, but tackling an issue like this, it has to be multifaceted. You're talking about perceptions, you're talking about laws, you're talking about enforcing laws, and then you're also looking at some of the policies that actually lend for these types of practices to happen. So let's talk about how this roadmap has been envisioned as to how we move towards the point of action to stop early unions and child marriage.
Thank you very much for having me this morning. One of the things we're looking at is the underlying cause. When we see early marriage, child marriage and early union, we're actually seeing the symptoms of social factors. So we look at a number of factors for us as UNICEF. As Ms. Margaret has mentioned, there are a number of drivers of this. One of it is poverty. Yeah. From the data we got, we realized that this is prevalent amongst the poorest families. Secondly, we also realized that the issue of education is important. We realized that most of those getting married were girls who only attend primary education. Wow. So we realized that the empowerment, the skills and the abilities to be able to be independent, to be able to take care of themselves, to be able to take care of their children is a driving factor. So these key underlying factors. We also look at issues like gender stereotyping, what is perceived among social norms as the role of the girl or the role of the boy. So these are factors that are actually driving these symptoms. So for us, in terms of defining the roadmap, we are looking at the drivers, because if you don't address the drivers, then you may not be able to deal with the symptoms. Sure. As Ms. Margaret mentioned, this has been a conversation for a very long time, but concretely, how are we going to make sure that we can address and eradicate it? So for us, in terms of the roadmap, we are looking at how do you address issues of poverty among these families. For a number of the data that we have, we realize that a number of these kids are coming from single-headed households or single-parent households. So again, that's also a factor. So one of the areas we're looking at is social protection. Yeah. How do we provide support to these vulnerable families so they could continue to send both their girls, especially their girls, as well as their boys, to school and be able to enable them to complete their education. A second point that you rightly mentioned was the issue of the harmonization of the legislative framework. So like Ms. Margaret mentioned, the common law in Belize gives the age of 16 as the age of marriage. The Convention on the Rights of the Child gives the age of 18 as the age of the child. And when we look at our educational system, the ages of 5 to 14 are the mandatory years of education. So at the age of 14, as it is no longer mandatory, then we find out that a number of these young boys and girls drop out of school, and then a lot of them end up getting into early unions. So these are some of the considerations we're looking at. How do we harmonize the legislative frameworks in line with the Convention of the Rights of the Child that defines the child as somebody below the age of 18? Secondly, how do we look at our educational system? in order to ensure that we can make education mandatory up to the age of 16, if possible, or even up to the age of 18, which is the age of the child, so that we can ensure that kids do not drop out of schools, and the support system that is necessary to enable them to complete their education or even learn a skill to empower them will be important. So these are key considerations in terms of the roadmap.
Alison Drayton, let's talk a bit here about the sexual and reproductive health rights and how this ties into this issue. A child who gets married is then more at risk at having what we call adolescent pregnancy or teenage pregnancy. But we also know that it is a common practice, or it is a practice that sometimes when a young girl gets pregnant, the family actually prefers she marries the person because it is seen as more acceptable. So this goes right back to the idea of having adequate sexual and reproductive health education as early as possible. Do you want to talk about that?
Absolutely. Let me start with a point that I see as a great inconsistency, not only in Belize, but actually across the Caribbean, which is that even in the countries where the age of marriage is 18, you can get married before that with parental consent or guardian consent, but you cannot access any information on family planning until the age of 18. So you can get married at 16 or be in a relationship, but you cannot go and talk to a doctor about how to mitigate the impacts of that for 2 more years, which is, I think, pretty ridiculous. We also have the situation in the Caribbean where, while for years comprehensive sexuality education has been part of the health and family life curriculum, many teachers do not feel comfortable teaching it, and it is offered in most schools very intermittently. So one of the issues with adolescent pregnancy, which may be a driver into child marriage or early union, is there's an assumption by a lot of adults that it's obvious to young people what sexual activity is and what leads to pregnancy and to other consequences. And that is not the case. And particularly in those situations where people are actually active quite young. One statistic that has not been mentioned is allied to the data that both Ms. Margaret and my colleague Alison have shared, is the extent to which how early sexual debut happens in the Caribbean, and how many people report that that debut was non-consensual. Over 60% of girls and over 40% of boys report that their first experiences were non-consensual. Now, in addition to lying on taxes, the other thing that everybody lies about is sex. So my point on that is, if that is what is being recorded, I would pretty confidently say that the figures are much higher than that. So as Ms. Margaret mentioned, there are also great issues related to gender-based violence, to the undermining of rights. And that comes back, as Alison Parker has said, to the issue of comprehensive sexuality education in school, which covers, among other things, what your sexual and reproductive health and rights are. I think it is very important to talk to young people, age appropriately, obviously, about how to say no, what is the behavior that you should expect, how to safeguard your sense of self, And to link it, this is also very important, to link part of that awareness to the economic consequences of early marriage, early sexual union, and early sexual debut. We have a lot of historical data that points to the interrelationship between those three things and lack of economic opportunity down the road. And that has consequences for the individual, for the families of the people involved, and ultimately for the country, because that is very linked to also a stress on the social protection systems, which in the Caribbean are not as robust as they need to be to cover all of the population. So, one of the reasons that UNICEF and UNFPA are in this partnership globally around this program is that it is a very tight interlinkage between the rights of the child and the sexual and reproductive health and rights, and the education around that in school, but also with families and at the community level.
Alison, if you allow me to follow up there, as a representative in the Caribbean, I think you're very, you can help us understand the picture as to the rest of the region as well. We have data in Belize, and I know in the rest of the Caribbean, that shows the level of sexual activity that takes place very early amongst our children. The age of sexual initiation, we have things like what we're seeing now with early unions and child marriages. We have data to show the prevalence of adolescent pregnancies, teenage pregnancies. So we have all this information. And so we know the type of activity that takes place. But it seems to be very disconnected from a conservative viewpoint that is held in the Caribbean, especially by parents, and I want to say fueled a lot by the religious sector, as to what children should and should not be allowed to be exposed to. What's been the progress in being able to match the data with the response in the rest of the Caribbean? Because we've certainly had a lot of trouble here in Belize. Miss Nick can share that.
Well, let me provide a bit of comfort. Yeah. Belize is not alone in these challenges. Yeah. The Caribbean as a region has the second highest rates of adolescent pregnancy in the world after sub-Saharan Africa, the second highest rates of HIV/AIDS infections after sub-Saharan Africa. Belize's figures for adolescent pregnancy are very high. I think you are second in the region. Yeah. Guyana, the country from which I come, is showing leadership in this area. I hope they're going to equally show leadership in bringing those rates down. Yeah. And in both countries, I would say that there is a strong correlation between the alarmingly high figures and the fact that in fact both these countries have large hinterlands and large rural populations. And for any of us who have ever spent time in the country, let us acknowledge that night comes early, there's nothing to do, and people abhor boredom. And it speaks to the need for capturing that dimension of it. As Ms. Nichols has said, it's true, it's not a rural problem alone in Belize or in Guyana, but the figures are higher in the rural areas. And in both countries, I believe, are higher in the areas with indigenous populations, which also speaks partly to cultural norms and partly to poverty. Mm-hmm. The good news is that with commitment, with political leadership, and with community engagement, these figures can come down remarkably quickly. Antigua and Barbuda, which used to be among the top 5 countries in the region with very high adolescent pregnancy, brought their rates down by 25% in 4 years,
Wow.
which
Wow.
I think is just, I know, it is just remarkable. And UNFPA is completing a study to look at how they achieve this. And the study is not finalized yet, but I mean, a couple of insights. So one is, as I said, political will, political leadership, and active outreach in terms of community engagement. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I found very interesting when I was talking to Antigua, it too, on the books, is very conservative. It has some of the most rigorous laws in the Caribbean around issues like access to family planning information, etc. But culturally, they are more accepting, more accommodating, more relaxed about these issues. Mm-hmm. And I found it very interesting when I was talking to the colleagues in the Ministry of Social Development, mm-hmm. and they all looked at me with surprise when I raised the issue of how are they achieving this. They go into the communities and the schools with peer education, but there's also one pharmacy in Antigua that everybody knows that they can go to for condoms, morning after pills, etc. And the government essentially, essentially everybody has found a way to accommodate as a way of bringing the figures down. And then the Prime Minister Brown, when I was speaking with him, mentioned, and this links back to a point all three of us have made, the importance of education. Yeah. He said that he thought a critical thing in bringing those figures down is the government started offering scholarships to young people for university education. Mm-hmm. And he felt strongly that with the prospect of opportunity, young people started making different decisions about their bodies because they did not wish to put their future at risk. I think, as with so many things, it is impossible to talk about solutions on these issues without factoring in economic empowerment, economic opportunity, and sustained engagement with young people and their parents on what a difference choice makes in furthering your life choices.
I'm so grateful that you shared that particular experience, because it shows us that it is possible and within our Caribbean culture and reality. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah. But as much as we talk about the empowerment and the education of our young people, I also want to look at the protection mechanisms that are in place and when they fail us. Ms. Nick, it is illegal for a 15-year-old to be married. They should not be married. But yet it has happened. I believe it's 16 and older. 16 to 18, you need parental consent, and over 18, you can decide for yourself. So let's talk about these loopholes, how they managed to happen, and how we're going to plug them up with this roadmap. Yeah.
Well, the thing is, Marlene, is that prior to 2005, unfortunately, children were able to be married at the age of 14. With parental consent. Yeah. The Marriage Act actually sets the age of 18 as the age of marriage. You can get married at 16, but it has to be with parental consent. Yeah. But anything other than that is illegal. And those marriages are actually null and void. One of the things that we hope to accomplish under the roadmap is to look at the whole bit of legislation, legal reform, and more importantly, the issue of enforcement. The survey and the focus groups reveal that there was a lot of ignorance, and of course, ignorance is no excuse for breaking the law, no? Yeah. And so I think that we have to be able to enforce the legislations to protect our children. I think, as was said a while ago, there has to be political will to ensure that these national agendas that we set out for our children and the strategies under them are fulfilled. And the only way we can do that is that this has to be done at all levels of our society.
Of course.
And we have to call and to make a call of action to all the stakeholders, including our government, our faith-based organizations, and our parents, the civil society, non-governmental organizations. And there has to be the type of pressure. I am happy that the roadmap is not a standalone document, because it is aligned to the several pieces of national policies that we have, like the gender policy, the youth policy. It is aligned to the children's agenda. It is aligned to the sustainable development goals.
Yeah.
And so, if Belize is supposed to realize the objectives under these and the goals of these national policies and plans, then we have to ensure then that we do the necessary legislative reform. We have to ensure that there is enforcement of legislation, because a lot of times we talk about the fact that we need new legislation. We don't need new legislation. We need to enforce the legislation that we have, because if it is illegal, it is illegal.
Yes, it is. It is.
Yeah.
And
if we sign the convention, it says children should be protected to 18.
That's right.
Exactly. And so we have to call it for what it is. And hence the reason why I said we have to make this call as we implement the roadmap. And we have to, and the call is for all of us, because we all have a collective responsibility to see how we can really and truly eradicate this major problem.
Yeah.
And
I think, as was shared, the whole, because like the rest of the Caribbean, in Belize, these 16-year-olds who are allowed to marry, again, we have the same problem with them accessing sexual and reproductive health services and that kind of thing. So, we are having some serious issues here. And we sign conventions and we develop our plans. And so we have to ensure that the mechanisms are in place and that people are held accountable, because I think that is one of our problems.
Yeah, but
we kind of want to push things under the rug, and we have to stop doing that. We have to move forward.
Ms. Nick, I know that we're pressed for time, and it's these conversations that we need to continue to have, because people need to understand. Yes, we have signed conventions, and we've done a lot of things. But at the same time, and I continue to say this every week while I'm here on the show. It's everybody's business. The public needs to know. And I feel that if, especially if we venture off into these villages and we venture off into these places that it's more prevalent to, then I think because we're educating them about it, then there might be such a slowdown. Yes, while we sign all these conventions and things might not be happening, people in those communities might not even know. It might seem that this is the norm, but we need to change that in these communities. That's my feel about it.
I totally agree with you, John, because that was some of the information that was revealed from the focus groups and the consultations that were held. And so, as a part of some of the strategies under the roadmap, those are some of the actions that we will have to take. We will have to actually get into communities. We will have to be able to educate pastors and religious leaders that, it is wrong and this is not how we do it. We will have to go to our alcaldes and to our women's group and to our youth groups. And that's the reason why I said that this journey is a long one. It is an important one. And notwithstanding how long the journey is, the machine is fueled and we are ready to continue the process for as long as it takes to eradicate this serious ill that we have in our society.
It's definitely, I think, an effort that has to be introduced in all sectors of society. And maybe we can get Ms. Parker to talk about that as we close. It is an issue where the society and the communities must have buy-in as well, where a parent does not want to give consent for their 16-year-old to get married, and where even if it's illegal, that it doesn't happen informally as well. So let's talk about how the roadmap includes being able to address behavior change and tackling some of the social norms that we've accepted for too long.
Thank you again, and I think what Ms. Margaret said is definitely on point. Taking this information to the household, taking the information to the parents, taking the information to those who actually conduct the early unions is going to be an important shift for us. Yes, the legislative frameworks are there. Yes, Ms. Margaret has actually alluded to the fact that they need to be enforced. But then there's also the issue of the investment. There has to be an investment in this rollout so that it can happen. And that's the call we're also making for the roadmap, that yes, we can have a roadmap, yes, we can have monitoring mechanisms, but there has to be public, private, and individual investment in this process for us to make the necessary shift. We need to have the services available, because when we go into the communities, when we inform the parents, when we inform the religious leaders, when we inform the young people who have been very vocal and engaging around this process, they need to have the services, they need to have a go-to place that can give them the information they need, that can give them the awareness they need, and that can provide them with the accurate services that they deserve. So investment in those services right down at the community level will be an important shift for us to make. And thirdly, I think, like everybody has mentioned, it's a collective engagement. It's a collective investment. The examples my colleague Alison has mentioned show that at all levels, from the legislative, from the policymakers, right down to the household, had to be involved in it. And I'm proud that Belize is leading in this in the Caribbean. This is the first roadmap in the Caribbean that is actually detailing how we can engage early union and child marriage in the Caribbean region. So I hope we can be the blaze trailers and that we can make the necessary investment to make this happen. For us at UNICEF, like Alison has also mentioned, together with my colleagues, UNFP and the other UN agencies, we are here to support the government to make sure that, like, every parent wants the best for their child, especially the girls. Every parent wants their child to attain much more than they ever attained. Everybody wants a better future for their children. And we're here to make sure that we can walk that path. As long as it is, we can walk that path together to make a difference for every child, especially the girls.
Well said,
we
Alice.
definitely wish you the best of luck in moving forward with the roadmap. Just to close, of course, there is the virtual launch of the roadmap that takes place on Friday. And of course, people can tune into it on Facebook, on the National Committee for Families and Children's Facebook page at 10 a.m. And so people can get even more details and understand more about what's happening with this situation. Thank you all once again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having
You're
us.
welcome.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, and that was an excellent conversation to have. And conversations like that we need to continue to have so everybody is educated. We're about to take that break, though. When we come back, we will be chit-chatting with representatives of the Belize Cancer Society on Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Stay with us. We'll be right back.